I love gardening. There's nothing quite like harvesting delicious crops that you've grown yourself. If you're sitting on the garden fence wondering whether or not to start a garden, let me show you how easy it can be no matter what space you have available to do so. Many outdoor spaces are limited to perhaps a patio, terrace or a balcony. Well, it's amazing what you can grow in a space like that. There are many types of fresh fruits, herbs and salads that will happily grow in pots. So here are some berries and currants that I planted in the autumn. They're just about bursting into life, so there's lots of promise there. And you can see how I planted them in our video on that, which I will pop a link to in the description below. Then we've got strawberries. Growing strawberries in pots like these is great because they're much less likely to get munched by slugs. And then we've got herbs, and just about any herb will happily grow in a container. But what about veggies and salads? Well, it's mid-spring and the forecast is looking good, so I reckon it's time to plant up some pots, don't you? I'm going to be using a range of pots and they all have good drainage holes in the bottom. Now this is really important because you want any excess water to drain out from the potting mix so that roots aren't sat in really wet water, which can cause them to rot and really suffer as a result. The best way to start plants off is from seed. However, you can start plants off by using plug plants such as these here. They're grown on, they skip the most precarious step of seed sowing, and they give you a bit of a head start, which is really useful as well. I always like to start from seed, but there's absolutely nothing wrong whatsoever with starting with plug plants, so don't let the gardening snobs tell you otherwise. Exactly when you decide to start off your container garden depends of course on your location, but mid-spring is as good a time as any as the days lengthen and it gets nice and warm to coax your seedlings along. So I'm going to start with these lettuce plugs, and I've got some others here for a bit of contrast, and I'm going to plant them into this fairly shallow container here. That's because lettuces don't have a particularly deep root system, so this is fine and makes a good, efficient use of our potting mix. I'm going in with just an all-purpose or multi-purpose potting mix, and it's peat-free again. And now we will plant our plugs, and I reckon we'll get about 5 in here without overcrowding them. You could, of course, just sow seeds of salad leaves direct, which is what I'm going to do with this next pot here, if I can open the packet. Right, so I'm using a spicy salad leaf mix. It's got a lovely mix of mizunas and mustards, these sort of Asian leaves, which give a lovely sort of spicy, pleasing textural contrast as well to the smooth and mild leaves of the lettuces down there. And I'm just literally scattering them very thinly over the surface like this. That should be about right. And then just simply covering them over with the tiniest amount of potting mix on top, and then just firming that down slightly. And then I've got these peas that are ready to plant here. Now I'm using a slightly taller pot here because that's what I've got, but because the roots probably won't go down quite as far, I've just part filled the bottom with some old, partly rotted leaves, which will be absolutely fine, and our potting mix will go on top of that. The roots may well go down into that, and that's fine, but it just saves on the potting mix, which can be quite pricey, especially lately. This is actually a dwarf variety of pea that's really well suited for growing in containers. Nevertheless, it could do with a bit of support because it might get to about 2 feet or say around 60 centimetres tall. Now, is it too pretentious or grandiose a statement to say that gardening can really transform your life? I don't think so. There is a purposefulness about gardening, sowing, planting and then reaping the rewards that follow. It's all deeply satisfying stuff. And as you watch the plants grow, I really think that you grow too. Sounds a bit crazy, but I genuinely believe that. A great thing to start with is herbs, essential for a burst of flavour and freshness. Herbs are ideal for growing on the patio, but even if you've got no garden, they will happily grow on a sunny windowsill, so you can still have herbs. You can often pick them up from the grocery store as living herbs like this, but if I take the pot off here and you come close, you can see that in fact we've got lots and lots of individual plants. If you don't separate them out, you'll get 1 or 2 cuts from this, but it'll go downhill pretty rapidly because they're too crowded in there. But we can take a few simple steps to dramatically increase the number of pickings we have and get 3, 4, even 5 times the amount of harvest. I've got my all-purpose potting mix here. It's a peat-free one, and all I'm simply going to do is break these store-bought herbs into 3, 4 or perhaps 5 clumps. So just get your fingers and thumbs in there and carefully just tear it apart like that, and then just shake the leaves free like that. Ooh, there's one that's got away. And then we can break these up again. So I've managed to get 4 separate clumps here, all with a good root system, and this extra space that they'll now have will really help them to reach a good size. So the first one goes into its original pot, and just feed in the potting mix around the edge, firm it down, and we'll do the other 3 now. Last job is just to give our parsley a bit of a water there, and these will last for so much longer now, and they'll recover quite quickly, ready for picking in a few days. And I've brought you down here just to look at these parsley plants here. These were grown from grocery store herbs, just like I did just then, and they've actually bushed out really beautifully. The final task is to give everything a good water. Now, what's great about container gardens like this is that it's so up close and personal. You can keep an eye on your plants and tend to them very easily indeed. The main job, of course, is to keep everything nicely watered, and that might be as frequently as twice a week or even every day in the height of summer. And then fruiting vegetables like tomatoes and peppers will need feeding every now and then with a liquid organic feed to help them produce their fruit to their full potential. Don't forget to re-sow, of course, as things finish, and add to your container collection to keep those pickings coming. I'm also going to be sowing some carrots, and then once my last frost has passed, I'm going to be planting out some tomatoes here as well. If you'd like more ideas for container growing, then do check out our video on that, and I will pop a link to that one in the description below. Right, on to our next project. If you've got some garden space, then the next stage is to grow in the ground into soil that's been enriched with some compost, or perhaps in beds like the ones behind me. This saves a lot of the associated cost of potting mix that would be used to fill pots and containers. And because the roots can grow down into the soil below, all that's needed to keep your garden in tip-top condition, whether growing in the ground or in raised beds, is to simply top up the soil with a little bit of compost every year. And of course, you can make your own compost. The beds I've got in my garden here are made from old pallet collars, which can be picked up very cheaply indeed, though of course you could make raised beds from planks of wood screwed to corner posts, no problem at all. But what I love about these pallet collars is they really are a kind of plug and play way to grow. You just open them out, drop them into place, fill them, and you're good to go. Let me demonstrate that right now. I simply carried the pallet collar into position and unfolded it and plonked it where I wanted. I then had to get it level because we were on a bit of a slope here. There were some pretty gnarly roots there which I had to cut out and hack at to be able to dig down. In fact, it was a bit of a hard effort. Then it's a question of smothering the weeds, but I put down some heavily overlapping plain cardboard to keep those weeds in check. And then it was time to fill. First up is some well-rotted manure, beautifully rich stuff which our roots will grow down into. But because I'll be making some sowings into here, I finished off with just 1 bag of potting mix, just skimmed over, raked nice and level, just to give a neat finish, and so I can easily sow and plant into it. I love getting my hands into the dirt. In fact, there's good evidence to show that having our hands in the soil and being close to it actually elevates our mood because of all the feel-good bacteria found within it. I kid you not. Now, the bed here, although it's in sunshine now, doesn't get quite as much sun as the other beds in the garden here. So I've chosen plants that can cope with a little bit of shade as well as some sunshine, of course. And to do that, I used the garden planner and filtered the selection for plants that will tolerate a little bit of shade, and I've added them to my plan. So let's use that as the basis for what we're about to plant now. First up, I'm going to plant some salad onions, and I sowed these a little bit earlier into these plug trays just to get a bit of a head start. Now they're sown as pinches of seed, so I've got a cluster of seedlings between say 2 to 5 in each plug, so I've got to make sure there's enough room for them all to push out and grow. And now for these beauties. These are an upright type of lettuce, and I've got room for about 6 here. Then some spinach. These guys can go about 8 inches or 20 centimetres apart. And then finally, for plugs wise anyway, it's these lovely little beets here. Again, I've sown them as clusters of seedlings, so they're going to go a little bit further apart than you might normally, up to about sort of 25 centimetres or 10 inches apart in both directions. Now that might seem like quite a wide spacing when you see how small they are, but believe me, once they grow, they soon fill out the space. For me, growing at least some of the food I eat is important because I know exactly where it's come from. I love the fact that I'm in tune with nature here and that I'm growing it organically and in soil that has been shown some love. The result is food that's going to taste better and, crucially, have a much higher nutritional content, something that's increasingly lacking in the commercially produced food from overworked soils. It gives me a real sense of satisfaction, this wonderful connection with the natural world, and it just makes me feel happier. Now I'm finishing here with a couple of rows of a small finger-sized salad carrot just to go in here. They don't need a huge amount of room to grow. Really fine seed, so it needs to be sown nice and thinly, just dropping 1 or 2 seeds every kind of inch or a couple of centimetres. I probably will need to thin these later on because it's very hard to sow them that thinly. And now it's just simply a question of finishing off with a good old drink of water to get everything on its way, especially those seeds. You could finish off with a sort of row cover like this. This is the fleecy one. It's pretty warm now, so this would probably get away without it, but I'm going to put it on just to keep those pigeons off for a couple of weeks until the plants just get a bit more established. Getting the first home and garden grown crops started off is thrilling. These are simple but intense pleasures. I'm pretty chuffed with the way this has turned out, and if you've got a gardening friend who might also like to have a go at something like this, then please do feel free to share the video and of course drop it a like as well. I'll catch you next time.